I had been counting down the days until Brian came back. The house smelled of roast chicken and fresh bread, the kind of welcome home dinner I always made for him. I smoothed the tablecloth and told myself that keeping up these little rituals was part of who I was as a wife. When the door finally opened, he stepped in with that familiar tired smile, suitcase in hand, and kissed my cheek, like everything was perfectly normal. For a second, I let myself feel comforted. But somewhere deep inside, a tiny ripple of unease stirred. He dropped his suitcase in the hallway, same spot as always, like it wasn't his job to deal with it. I noticed the way he rubbed the back of his neck before pulling out a chair at the table, looking worn out. "Smells amazing, honey," he said, already reaching for a slice of bread. I smiled back, but I studied him quietly, that instinctive radar I'd honed after years together flickering to life. Was he more distant than usual, or was I just overthinking? Dinner felt like a performance I'd been cast in 1,000 times before. I asked about his flight, his meetings, the usual small talk, while he answered with short, tired phrases between bites. His phone buzzed twice on the counter, but he ignored it, which only made me more curious. I tried not to let my eyes linger, tried not to let suspicion creep in, but something about his calm felt almost rehearsed. It was like he was determined to look ordinary, and that in itself made me uneasy. After we cleared the plates, I told him I'd unpack his things so he could relax. He leaned back in his chair and grinned. "You're the best, you know that?" The words should have warmed me, but instead they landed with a strange hollowness. I carried his suitcase into the bedroom, humming softly, as if normalcy could be willed into existence. Inside, I told myself, it was just clothes, toiletries, maybe a hotel notepad or two. Nothing more. Nothing that could turn my world upside down. I knelt by the bed and unzipped his suitcase, the familiar scent of stale hotel air rushing out. Shirts were folded unevenly, socks balled up in corners, the kind of careless packing Brian always did. I smiled to myself as I shook my head. This was the man I married, always rushing, never neat. But then my hand brushed against something softer, something that didn't belong to me. I pulled it out, and my heart stopped. It was a lacy bra, delicate and intimate, the kind of thing I would never wear, not in a million years. My fingers trembled as I held it up, the reality crashing in faster than I could catch my breath. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it got mixed up in the laundry. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. My chest tightened, and I felt a sharp ache spread through me, like a wound opening right there in our bedroom. I froze, listening for the sound of his voice in the living room. He was humming, relaxed, as if the ground hadn't just split open beneath us. I stared at the bra in my hand, my mind racing, my body shaking, and I realized everything I thought was solid between us had just shifted. And now, the question wasn't whether to confront him, it was how. I sat there for a moment, staring at the bra as if it could somehow explain itself. My chest felt tight, every breath sharp and shallow. This wasn't mine. I'd never bought anything like it, never even considered it. Whispering to myself, I could barely get the words out. So this is what business trips look like to him. It sounded bitter, broken, like a truth I had been avoiding for far too long finally spoke back to me. The weight of it in my hands was unbearable, so I stood, clutching it like evidence in a trial. My feet felt heavy as I walked down the hallway toward the living room. Each step echoed louder than it should have, like my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He was sitting there on the couch, scrolling through his phone, perfectly at ease, perfectly ordinary. For a second, I almost hated how normal he looked. I stopped in front of him, holding the bra out like a weapon. My voice came out cold, steady in a way that surprised even me. "Brian, care to explain what this is?" He looked up, eyes wide, his mouth opening but no words forming at first. That silence was louder than any confession, and I already knew I wasn't wrong. He finally stammered, "What? That's not mine. Must be a mistake at the hotel laundry." His voice cracked on the word mistake, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. A bra, folded neatly between his shirts, just accidentally slipped into his suitcase? I narrowed my eyes, shaking my head slowly, and my voice came out sharper than I expected. "Hotel laundry doesn't fold bras into your suitcase, Brian." His face flushed, his eyes darting from me to the floor, searching for an escape route. I could see his mind scrambling, trying to pull together a story that would hold me just long enough for him to wriggle free. But the truth sat heavy in my hand, impossible to deny, impossible to erase. My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady, every word cutting through the air like glass. I wanted him to admit it, to own the betrayal that was already written all over his face. The silence stretched, and I could almost hear the walls closing in on him. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and finally met my eyes. That moment told me more than words ever could. He knew he was caught. I stood there, the bra dangling from my hand, while he fumbled with excuses that fell apart before they even left his lips. Every second he hesitated, every shallow breath he took, only confirmed what I already knew. He wasn't blindsided, he was cornered. And in that corner, his silence screamed louder than any lie. Inside, I felt a storm rising. Anger, disbelief, and heartbreak tangled together until I could hardly tell one from the other. My chest ached as if someone had reached inside and twisted my ribs. But on the outside, I stayed still, calm, controlled, like I'd been preparing for this moment all along. It was strange how betrayal could sharpen a person instead of breaking them. Finally, he tried again, his voice weak. "Amanda, please. You've got it wrong." But the way his eyes shifted, refusing to meet mine, told me the truth was already spilling out between us. I tightened my grip on the bra, lifted my chin, and thought, this isn't just about a fling stuffed into a suitcase. This is about everything he thought I'd never notice. He shot up from the couch, his voice suddenly louder, sharper. "Amanda, you're overreacting. You always think the worst of me." The words hit me like slaps, but instead of making me shrink, they made me stand taller. I looked at him, steady, the bra still in my hand. "I don't need to think the worst," I said quietly. "It's right here in front of me." My calmness seemed to rattle him more than any screaming ever could. Brian's face twisted, caught somewhere between anger and panic. He ran his fingers through his hair, pacing the room like a trapped animal. I could see him trying to spin the story, to turn this back on me, like I was the one who had crossed a line. "You never trust me, Amanda," he barked. "You're always suspicious, always doubting." His words dripped with accusation, but they only revealed his desperation. Inside, I felt the sting, but I refused to let it break me. For years, I'd let his raised voice carry more weight than my quiet instincts. Not this time. I stayed rooted, my voice low but firm, every syllable deliberate. "Stop twisting this. I'm not crazy, Brian. You did this. You put this in our home." And I could see in his eyes that he knew I wasn't backing down. His voice cracked as he snapped back, "Fine. You want the truth? It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything." The casual way he said it, like tossing away a candy wrapper, made my stomach churn. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from fury. I could feel my voice rise, raw and breaking at the edges. "Didn't mean anything? You humiliated me in my own home." He froze for a second, startled by my tone, maybe even by the tears that welled in my eyes but didn't fall. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't begging. I was demanding he face what he'd done. The mask of control he wore on every business call, Every dinner party was slipping, and I watched it crumble right there in front of me. It was almost pathetic, seeing him stripped of all that false confidence. Inside, though, my heart was shattering. Every laugh we'd shared, every promise he'd made, flashed before me like broken glass. How do you reconcile the man who swore you were his whole world with the one who stuffed another woman's bra into his suitcase? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. There was no going back. He tried to soften his tone, reaching out as if touch could erase betrayal. Amanda, listen. It was nothing. A mistake. A lapse. His hand hovered in the air, but I stepped back, the space between us wider than any miles he had traveled. My silence burned hotter than words, and I saw the panic flicker in his eyes. He was losing control of the script he always thought he could direct. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My voice came low, steady, and sharp. A lapse is forgetting your keys, Brian. A fling is a choice. And you made it. The words seemed to cut through him, but instead of remorse, I saw his jaw tighten, his pride trying to hold the pieces together. He wanted me to fold, to let him convince me I was overreacting, but I wasn't the same woman he left behind before that trip. Inside, I felt a strange calm begin to settle, like the eye of a storm. My heart was still breaking, but my resolve was hardening. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized this wasn't just about what he did. It was about who he truly was. And if I was going to survive this, I couldn't let his lies define me anymore. That night, I didn't scream. I didn't cry in front of him. I simply walked down the hallway and closed the door to the guest room. The sound of the latch clicking felt like the first boundary I had drawn in years. Lying in that unfamiliar bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every word, every excuse, every insult he'd thrown to protect himself. Oddly enough, I felt more awake than ever. The betrayal cut deep, but beneath it was a strange sense of clarity. By morning, the fog of shock had thinned, leaving only determination. I brewed my coffee in silence, the smell filling the kitchen like armor. Brian shuffled in, trying to act as though the night before had been a bad dream. But I barely looked at him. My mind was already moving forward, further than he could see. While he sipped his coffee, I was sketching the blueprint of my exit. Later that day, I logged into our bank account, scanning every detail with a precision I didn't even know I had. My hands didn't shake anymore. They were steady, controlled. I wasn't just looking at numbers. I was reclaiming power. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for him to choose me. I was choosing myself, step by step, with a quiet strength he'd never see coming. That afternoon, I met my best friend at our favorite cafe, the one with chipped mugs and the smell of cinnamon always in the air. She leaned across the table, her eyes filled with worry. Amanda, what are you going to do? I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the steam rise between us like a curtain. Then I looked at her, my voice steady, sharper than I ever thought it could be. He packed someone else's bra in his suitcase. I'll pack him out of my life. Saying it out loud made something shift inside me. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was resolve, solid and immovable. My friend reached across the table, squeezing my hand, and I felt a small surge of strength flow into me. She didn't have to say much. The look in her eyes was enough. She knew I wasn't just reacting. I was building a plan, one he would never see coming. Walking back home, I noticed everything differently. The weight of my keys in my pocket, the crunch of leaves under my shoes, the rhythm of my own breath. These tiny details grounded me, reminded me that I was still here, still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready to face it head on. Back at the house, I moved quietly, almost invisibly, while Brian carried on as if our life was untouched. He flipped channels on the TV, muttering about work emails, and I nodded at the right times, masking my thoughts behind a calm face. What he didn't see was me slipping important documents into a folder, checking my phone for the lawyer's reply, making calls in whispers from the car. Every action was small, but each one felt like a brick laid on the path to freedom. At night, when he drifted off on the couch, I stood in the doorway watching him. For years, I'd looked at this man as my partner, my anchor, my safety. Now, all I saw was a stranger who had gambled our marriage for a moment's thrill. And instead of sadness, I felt an icy clarity. He thought he could gaslight me into submission, but what he didn't know was that his betrayal had sharpened me into steel. Lying in bed, I ran my fingers along the cool sheets and whispered to myself, "This is not the end of me. It's the beginning." The thought wasn't just comforting, it was electrifying. I closed my eyes, not with dread, but with anticipation. Tomorrow would bring choices, and every choice would carve me closer to the woman I was meant to become. A week later, I sat across from Brian at the kitchen table, the same spot where we'd shared countless dinners and countless lies. This time, I had a folder in front of me, not recipes, not bills, but divorce papers. He looked at me with that easy smile he always used when he thought he could charm his way out of anything. But the smile faltered when I slid the papers across the wood toward him. His face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. "Amanda, don't do this," he finally whispered, his voice cracking with panic. "I'll change. I'll fix everything." I almost laughed at the irony. Change? Fix? Those were words he should have thought about before tucking betrayal into his luggage and bringing it home like a souvenir. I leaned forward, my voice calm but unshakable. "You already fixed everything when you chose her," I said, locking eyes with him. "Now I'm choosing me." In that moment, I felt the weight lift off my chest, the kind of lightness you only feel when you finally stop carrying something that was never yours to bear. And the look on his face told me he realized he'd lost me for good. He pushed the papers back toward me, shaking his head like a child refusing to accept bedtime. "No, Amanda, we can get past this. It was nothing. Just a mistake." His voice cracked with desperation, but every word only built a stronger wall between us. I didn't even flinch. I'd already cried my tears in silence. Now I was done giving him my pain. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slid it into my bag, and stood. "You don't get to rewrite this story," I said, my voice steady and final. "You made your choice when you packed that bra next to your shirts. You thought I'd never find it, but I did. And now, I'm the one writing the ending." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of what he'd lost. His eyes darted to mine, pleading, but I only felt a calm resolve settle deeper inside me. The woman who once would have begged, bargained, or forgiven was gone. In her place stood someone sharper, stronger, unwilling to carry his betrayal one step further. As I walked toward the door, the sound of my heels on the tile felt like a drumbeat, steady, final, and unstoppable. I opened the front door, the evening air cool against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Behind me, Brian's voice cracked, calling my name, but I didn't turn back. The sound of his desperation no longer pulled at me. It repelled me. I stepped onto the porch, lifted my chin, and let the silence between us say what words never could. We were done. Walking down the path, I felt lighter with every step, like I was shedding years of lies with the click of my heels on the pavement. My hands no longer trembled. They were steady, strong, purposeful. I wasn't leaving with shame or regret. I was leaving with my power. That house, that marriage, that man, they no longer owned me. As I reached my car, I glanced at my reflection in the window. My eyes looked different, clearer, sharper, alive. I slipped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and knew this wasn't just an ending. This was the first chapter of a new story, one I would write for myself, without apology, without fear, without him. Months later, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. My days weren't filled with waiting for phone calls or second-guessing excuses anymore. They were filled with choices that were mine alone. I'd taken up traveling, stamping my passport with places I'd only dreamed of before. Each city, each new horizon, reminded me that freedom has a taste, sweet, sharp, and unforgettable. At work, I'd grown bolder, pouring my energy into a small business I once thought was just a side project. Now it was thriving, carrying my name, my vision, my strength. Colleagues who used to see me as quiet now leaned in when I spoke, drawn to the confidence I had finally claimed. It felt like I'd stepped out of the shadows and into my own light. One afternoon, over lunch, a colleague tilted her head and said, "You seem lighter, Amanda. Happier." I smiled, the kind that reached my eyes, and answered, "Because I am." The heaviest thing I carried was his betrayal, and I finally put it down. Saying it didn't sting anymore, it set me free all over again. In the quiet moments, I sometimes thought back to that night, the suitcase, the bra, the lies. But instead of pain, it brought me clarity. That discovery had been the crack that let me see just how fragile our life together really was. And once it shattered, I realized I was never meant to piece it back together. I was meant to build something new, stronger, entirely my own. My friends noticed the difference too. They said I laughed louder now, that my eyes sparkled in ways they hadn't in years. I could feel it in my body, the weight gone, my steps quicker, lighter. I started embracing the little joys again, the smell of coffee in the morning, the thrill of booking a plane ticket, the freedom of sleeping diagonally across my own bed. What surprised me most was the peace. Not the dramatic kind that comes with fanfare, but the steady kind that lingers like a gentle hum in the background. I didn't need revenge to keep burning. I'd already taken back what mattered most, myself. And in that quiet victory, I found a happiness he could never take away. The final test came the day I stood at the airport, suitcase in hand. But this time, it wasn't his suitcase cluttering the hallway. It was mine. Packed not with someone else's secrets, but with my own dreams. As I wheeled it toward the gate, I felt an energy buzzing in my chest, the thrill of stepping into a future that belonged only to me. I paused by the window, watching the planes rise into the sky, and thought about the woman I used to be. She had believed love meant sacrifice, silence, and second chances. But the woman standing here now knew better. Love wasn't supposed to break you. It was supposed to build you. And if it didn't, then walking away was the bravest thing you could ever do. As the announcement called my flight, I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter and smiled. I wasn't running from betrayal anymore. I was running toward freedom. And for the first time in my life, the weight I carried was nothing but possibility.